I think we'll get started. We've got a small group, but I think we're competing with some dancers outside. But if anyone feels like heading outside and doing some dancing, my colleague suggested some conga dancing and bringing people back into the session, that would be great. But otherwise, just please stay with us and hopefully some more people will join us for the session. My name is Bruce Dunn. I'm from the Asian Development Bank. I'm an environment specialist with what's called our Regional Sustainable Development Department. We've co-organised this session with Dr. Grootje from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and also associated with the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management, also working with WWF, and also with the Sub-Global Assessment Network with UNEP WCMC. So we're really pleased to be here tonight as partners working together. What this session's about, you see from the title here, is towards a global learning network on ecosystem service assessment, valuation and management. Now, I think many of you here are very familiar with the ideas of ecosystem service assessment, valuation. It's something that's been getting a lot of attention over the last few years. It's not a new concept, it's something that's been around for many years, looking at ecosystem service assessment. But when you hear, for example, the leaders' dialogue that had just happened upstairs, the discussion around the importance of valuing ecosystem services and bringing that into decision making is certainly picking up, and you can hear it from various leaders across the world. So I think this is the right time to be having these sorts of discussions. Now, for this particular session, what we want to cover is two main aims. The first is we're looking at varying needs, approaches in applying ecosystem service assessment. And within this session, we're actually going to be looking at it from a couple of different scales. Partly from the site level, looking at calculation of ecosystem services and their application at local level, but also going up to a broader level. And what we're going to have in the session today is some presentations on a number of regional programs that are looking at issues of ecosystem service values and how we apply them in decision-making processes across a number of nations, and looking at the transboundary dimensions of how we address these issues. So that's going to be a key feature. The second aim is looking at how we foster a dynamic and vibrant global learning network on ecosystem service assessment and valuation. And this is something that's been happening for a number of years, and groups like the Ecosystem Services Partnership and the SGA network exist, and there's a lot of interest. We've got the TEAG group and others that are really bringing these issues out, academic communities. And through this session, we'd like to profile a couple of them, and we'd also like to invite others to participate in this and strengthen the global learning network so we can facilitate this work further. Now, firstly, before we get into the individual sessions, the individual speakers, I wanted to give a little bit of context, a little bit of background, looking at this region that we're in now, in Asia and Pacific. This is where we work, my organisation, the Asian Development Bank, and I wanted to profile a couple of issues and why we think this is an important issue to tackle, and it'll also link with some of the presentations later. Firstly, in the context, Asia and the Pacific, fastest growing region in the world. Over the last 6 years, we've seen average growth rates of about 8%, but in a number of countries it's much higher than that, some as high as 13, 15% across the region. We know China's an economic powerhouse in the region, and growth is moving along very quickly. We also have the largest population in the world, around 4 billion people, and although there's been massive gains in poverty reduction in the region, we still have about 1.8 billion people in this region that don't have adequate access to services, to basic services like water, like energy, and many of these rely on healthy ecosystem services to actually be sustained. So moving forward in this region, we've got enormous challenges in terms of balancing sustainable development with the conservation of nature, protection of natural capital. And this we see already in terms of impacts in the region. Currently, a number of the countries are facing deficits in terms of their biocapacity versus the ecological footprint that they're having. This is some data I just present to you that's come from the Global Footprint Network, which essentially looks at the biocapacity in terms of the available natural resources that countries in the region have versus their use of those natural resources, their ecological footprint, and that covers a number of different sectors. And what you see in the figure here is the countries in green currently still having biocapacity. You can refer to them as biocapacity predators. And others, many countries in the region, that are now starting to have a deficit, meaning that they're having to import natural resources from other parts of the world to meet their own needs. The other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to for Asia and the Pacific is the ongoing loss of natural capital that we're facing. I think many of you are pretty clearly aware of this. This data here is from Living Planet Index, calculated through the Zoological Society of London and working with WWF. It plots actually the decline in number of populations of species. This is mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds. Brings data for about 9,000 species across the world. And what we see in the orange line is the trend globally, where we've seen over the last 30 years a decline of about 24%. But in Asia and the Pacific, it's been much more drastic, about twice the rate, and over that same period, about a 64% decline in the populations of these species. So I guess the story that I'm trying to sort of simply lay out here is that we've got rapid growth, we've got large populations, and we're seeing this ongoing decline in biodiversity. And it's really something that we need to address systematically in decision making. And for us, looking at ecosystem services is going to be a key issue here. Now, for my organisation and a number of the partners that we're working with in the region, we're currently prioritising some efforts in 4 major large-scale regional ecoregions or ecosystems. Probably familiar with quite a few of them. We've got the Coral Triangle, the area in blue. Currently, the world's centre of marine biodiversity has the greatest extent and the highest diversity of marine life anywhere in the world, and supports, the coastal and marine resources support about 120 million people directly with their livelihood, so it's a key area of focus for us. The Mekong, you have currently one of the world's largest rivers that supports the largest inland fishery in the world. About 60 million people rely directly on that for their subsistence, and large extended forests, about 100 million hectares, if I'm correct, which has significant carbon stocks as well for those of you that are interested in the carbon issues there. The Himalayas, particularly the eastern Himalayas that we're focusing on there, supports water sustainability for about 1 billion people in the region. Major rivers that flow down through the rest of Asia that are critical, and the sustainability of those rivers are critical in the services that we provide. And then the spot here, around Borneo, up here, the orange area, is the heart of Borneo, which a colleague from WWF, Anna van Papenburg, will be presenting on later. But this is an area, it's the 3rd largest continuous rainforest in the world, the largest area of continuous rainforest in Asia and the Pacific, and is often referred to as the lungs of Asia. Incredibly important for its carbon stocks and the linkage between ecosystem services and livelihoods in the region for people that live there. So this is where we're concentrating our efforts, and we're working very closely with countries in the region. In each of these areas, you see countries at a national level and also at a regional level coming together to manage and sustain these resources. We've got the Coral Triangle Initiative, the Greater Mekong Sub-Region Environment Program, recently the Living Himalayas Initiative that was championed by Bhutan, and you've also got the Heart of Borneo Initiative involving 3 countries there. So you're getting a lot of national commitment towards sustainably managing these resources. But just a few quotes here. I won't read these, but you can see some of the high-level commitments in terms of looking at the sustainability of the region and the linkage between ecosystem services and livelihoods. Now, for us in working with these countries, what we see constantly is environment ministers trying to make the case to their finance ministries and planning ministries as to why we need to manage natural capital better, and looking for tools that they can make the case in economic and financial terms. So the work that we're going to be discussing tonight in terms of valuation of ecosystem services is quite critical for that. Now that brings me then to our program. What we're going to be doing through this session, we're going to start off with firstly Rudolf de Groot from Wageningen University, who's going to be giving us a presentation looking at from the science to the policy of ecosystem services as a foundation for the rest of the session. Then I mentioned we're going to look at some of the regional programs that are trying to tackle these issues. The Greater Mekong Sub-Region, my colleague from the ADB, Sana Franawana, is going to be presenting on that, followed by Anna van Papenburg from WWF, who's going to be presenting on the Heart of Borneo work and some very innovative work that they've been doing on ecosystem service valuation and looking at various green growth scenarios. Then we're going to look a little bit more broadly at the various partnerships and global networks that have sprung up around this work and how we can work together to strengthen those networks. And that's going to be led by Dolph again and then Holly Booth, looking at the SGA. Following that, I'll invite all of the panelists, all of the presenters to join the table down here for a panel session where we'll welcome questions from the floor and hopefully we can have a lively and dynamic discussion with all of you here. So with that, I'll move into the first presentation. So I'll invite Dolph to take the floor. And hope you can all join with us for the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce, for the introduction and also introducing me already and doing your best to pronounce both my name and my university correctly, which is easy for myself. You make a small mistake in the title of my short introduction, which is not from science to policy, but more from science to practice. I think there are already a lot of policy initiatives going on, but putting concept into practice is something that still needs a lot of work, and that's what we are trying to achieve with these networks we will be presenting and through case studies. Just a few slides. We assume you're all familiar with the concept of ecosystem service assessment, actually. Just a few slides on the history and the context and why we are doing that. This looks like a population graph, actually, but it is the development of publications on that have ecosystem services in the title and in the abstract. It starts actually picking up in the mid-1990s with publication in Nature by Costanza and a bunch of co-authors and Jess and Bailey. Maybe you are familiar with those two publications. Then it continued to increase until the Millennium Assessment was released, and then it really started going fast with the number of publications on this topic. This graph runs until 2010, so the effect of the TEEP report is not included yet, but just recently I saw an update. We had a meeting of the partnership a few weeks ago, and Bob Costanza actually showed a slide that shows that it continues like you see on this graph, so it's almost half the slide. Regarding the linkage with what happens in policy, I think the fact that last year or 2 years ago in October 2010, IPPS was officially accepted by the CPD as a mechanism to bring together the science and the policy makers in the field of ecosystem services, and is now officially established, and they're working on the further development of the organizational structure of the intergovernmental science policy platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services. So there's lots of science and also more and more policy going on, but does it work in practice? I'm often asked about this, that people slowly begin to realize the potential of this concept to harmonize conservation and development and put kind of this link between ecology and economic into practice, but is it really working? And one thing we know from the TEEP study, this comes out of the database that was developed for the TEEP study, is the value of those ecosystems. This is based on a number of something like 250 studies from which we extracted more than 1,300 data points on the pointer here. On the left side you see the main ecosystem complexes, and on the horizontal scale it's a log scale in terms of dollar values per hectare per year. And you see there's a wide range for most ecosystems, showing the value, the monetary value, especially for coral reefs. It ranges between a little bit more than $10 per hectare per year to almost $1 million. And that nicely illustrates actually what this graph shows. There's some very remote small reefs, nobody's going there, so maybe some carbon sequestration or a few other regulating services, but not much economic value. Whereby reefs in the Caribbean attracting millions of visitors and lots of other services, they really generate benefits of $1 million per hectare per year or more. And you have to be very careful with using these kind of studies in other decision-making contexts, but it does give you a feeling of the order of magnitude of